Hey everyone, my name is Vonnie Hudson, and in this video, I'm going to give you a deeper understanding of the Common Unix Printing Service, colloquially known as CUPS. So we're going to start the process by looking at CUPS from an attacker perspective. Pre-recon, reconnaissance, all the way through exploitation and full compromise of an endpoint. 2, we're going to dig into how I set this up. We're going to look at my lab environment so that you can also replicate my steps and get ground truth understanding on this threat vector. 3, we're going to build a detection analytic. That I think is the most important because I'm going to show you how you can, 1, use free tools such as Elastic Security, that is if you're using the trial, and Elastic Defend, which is the EDR, to both detect and prevent these particular threats. Then we'll pivot and look at the PCAP, get right on the wire, and I'm going to show you what the Zeek and Suricata logs look like so that we can truly understand this threat and approach it in a sensible way. Finally, we'll close up with some mitigations, and that'll be it, all right? So let's jump right into it. So what is CUPS? CUPS is essentially the service used by both Linux and Unix users when they want to manage printers or interact with print jobs or the printer spooler. And by default, Ubuntu has this particular service running. In fact, it's listening on all interfaces on UDP port 631. That's the first issue, right? It's listening on all interfaces. So if you have a server that has multiple network interface cards or multiple IPs, it doesn't matter which network interface card receives this packet. The destination IP could be any one of them. Your server will receive this, the UDP packet and process it. CUPS is also started by default. So what's the problem here? Well, attackers, and specifically Evil Socket, who appears to be a gray hat hacker, maybe somewhere between gray hat and white hat, but he released a pretty thorough write-up on what the threat vector is. An attacker is able to create a UDP packet, carefully crafted, and inject that packet into a CUPS server listening on port 631. The CUPS server will then automatically respond. So the attacker essentially induces the server to respond with a GET directive. And that essentially tells the attacker to respond with some directives. And essentially what's supposed to happen is the printer is supposed to respond with its attributes, right? I'm a printer of this model. I have this make, I'm this serial number. But because the attacker is masquerading like a printer, essentially the attacker is a malicious printer, when the attacker responds, they're able to inject some malicious commands, and it ultimately ends up in something known as a fumatic filter, a fumatic rip filter, which is a directive inside of a file known as a .ppd. And if you inject some commands inside of that ppd file, it'll be processed by the fumatic rip filter because it also, this is really frustrating, but it will blindly accept untrusted user input and process it. This binary has been vulnerable to command injection for a while, or at least in various forms. The problem, though, from the user perspective is a new printer unceremoniously appears on their system. And if the user prints to it, instead of the expected output, either a PDF or a piece of paper with their document printed, the attacker is able to write arbitrary commands to the victim machine, to the disk, or return a reverse shell and get full control of the system. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. It's actually a chaining of multiple CVEs. There are actually 4 of them, which you can see right here. And the problem, if we scroll down a little bit, Evil Socket actually goes into detail on how he found this vulnerability. He used American Fuzzy Lop to fuzz the inputs. And when the application crashed, he was able to inspect the result and craft a exploit from it, and then report it to the correct individuals. Unfortunately, that bug disclosure process didn't go as smoothly as he hoped. But this is the part right here that is interesting, right? A packet containing any URL in the form of 03 and then this URL gets to UDP port 631. This triggers a sequence of events that results in CUP browsed connecting to that URL, a drive-by kind of thing. So that's the problem. And you see this printer showed up here. If you look at Shodan, we search for the string, you'll see a bunch of interesting things. Now, Shodan is kind of like Google for the Internet of Things. Instead of finding pages, you'll find refrigerators that are connected to the internet, or IP cameras, or generators, all kinds of things that really shouldn't be world reachable. And if we search for cups, you can see we get a good bit of results, 69,900. We can also search Zumai, which is kind of like Shodan, port 631. And you'll see we'll get 6.6 million. So I think we can be reasonably certain that there's somewhere between hundreds of thousands and maybe a few million vulnerable endpoints that are forward-facing right at the edge of the perimeter. And so this is a big problem. This shows you the magnitude of this particular risk factor. Now, what do we do with this? Well, what we're going to do is I'm going to step you through the process of attack, defend, detection, and mitigation. So let's look at attack first. We're going to use a tool called Cups Hacks. It's hard to say that. And this tool is essentially a way of exploiting this vulnerability. Now, because there is an exploit in the wild, anybody can go here and grab this tool. It just increases, I think, the likelihood of your cup server, which is forward-facing, being exploited. Therefore, it is highly recommended that those systems be either patched, the system be taken offline. We'll talk about the mitigation factors at the end of this video, but for now, I just want to show you the exploit that we're going to use. So the first step is we're just going to pop open a command prompt. Looks like I already have one open here. Here we go. And we're just going to run some recon. So I'm going to rename this recon. And first I'll show you my Kali box. You can see I'm in VirtualBox. I'm running ZSH. And yeah, just to kind of give you an idea of the setup we're in. So on the cup server, we will run TCP dump. You can see I'm running VirtualBox. These are all our systems. This is Elastic. This is our cup server. This is Kali. And I've got it in a group called cups. So we will go over to cups and we'll start TCP dump. So I will open a terminal. And let's just do sudo TCP dump -d to get a list of all the interfaces. You can see I got this box from osboxes.org. So that is where you can download free virtual machines for VirtualBox. I'm going to grab this interface name. And first, let's get a sense of our IP address for this interface. You can see it right there. And so what we can do is we can run TCP dump. Very verbose, don't resolve names on the interface we just specified. And we can write it out. Actually, let's go to home OS boxes. Documents, cups, exploit .pcap ng. That looks good. All right, so we're already capturing some packets. So now let's flip back over to Kali Linux, and we're going to jump into MITRE ATT&CK Technique ID T1018 Remote System Discovery. Okay, and we're just going to start with a simple ping. Because this ICMP echo response of a TTL 64 suggests that the target is running Linux. Typically, if the TTL is 64 or below, you're dealing with a Linux host. If it's somewhere between 65 and 128, usually it's a Windows system. Anything above 128 is usually some kind of like infrastructure appliance, Cisco, Juniper, something like that. And so this is a great way to sort of enumerate the target without running an overt scan. One ICMP packet sent is less noticeable than Nmap, right? But we've got this here. And let's go a little deeper. We'll run into MITRE ATT&CK Technique ID T1595.002, reconnaissance, active scanning, vulnerability scanning. So if we fire up Nmap in very verbose mode, we'll run a UDP scan. over port 631 and 632 against this target. Now, the reason I did 2 ports is because I want a control, right? We're running UDP. UDP is connectionless. It's like throwing a brick over the wall, not getting a response and not caring about it. We don't get a handshake. So sometimes if we don't get a response back, it's hard to ascertain what that means. What do we deduce from that? Does that mean the host isn't online, or does that mean the port is closed? With TCP, it's connection oriented. It's like throwing a brick over the wall and someone on the other side saying, ouch, you hit me, right? You get confirmation and acknowledgement as an ACK. UDP doesn't give us that. So I scanned 2 ports, 631 and 632, because I know 632 should be closed. So I have a control to test against. And you can see 631 is showing open. I know 632 is closed. These states are different. So it probably really is open, 631. That's my logic there. So what we can also do is I can run a version scan, and I'll just run it on port 631. And let's actually run the nmap script for cups. All right, and it's showing closed because we're running TCP. Now, TCP is not listening. If TCP was listening, then we would see this port would be open. But let me show you the scripts that we actually ran. They're in this user share nmap folder. So if I go to that folder, if I just list the contents of it, we can go to scripts, and then we can search for cups. And we can see these 2 scripts. We can look at one of them, and you can see what it does. If we ran nmap-p 631 and the IP with the cups info script, and we were listening on 631 TCP, look at all the information we would possibly have. The make of the printer, what jobs, the state of the printer, if it's stopped, if it started, if it's idle, how many jobs are printed. This is obviously stuff that you don't want exposed on the internet. So 631, TCP or UDP, bad, right? No one should see that except those inside your corporate LAN or those who are authorized. So let's go ahead and close this. I just want to show you that for a moment. Let's go back to the cup server, open a new tab, and let's just take a look at our system. So you can see we're running Ubuntu 22.04. And if we grep for cups, you can see that we actually have it installed as we expected, because it ships by default with Ubuntu. If we look at the status, you can see it's running. I did not start it. It starts automatically. And now, most importantly, if we look at the interfaces that are listening on this port, you can see we've got quad zeros, right? 0.0.0.0 means that cups browse D is listening across all interfaces on this system. Any UDP packet sent to any IP owned by this host will be processed by cups browse D. That's the issue, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at our IP address. And I just want to cut out just the part we care about here. So I'll grep for this line right here, just to kind of narrow down the output. And then we'll just capture this right here by using awk. And we'll just print the second space delimited field. All right, and then I'll just use cut with the / delimiter, grab the first field, and that gives us our IP. So, do we have any printers? What do you think it's going to show when I go to printers? Right, nothing, right? I mean, that's what we expected. There should be no printers on the system. If I open up Libra Writer, you should see the same. File, print. Just generic printer, right? Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go to the temp folder, take a look inside. We don't really have anything interesting. although we do have a couple of these Fumatic files. But we don't have anything that we wouldn't really expect. So if I look for this file, it says it doesn't recognize it. There's no such file named that. But I want to continually look. So we're going to scan every 0.1 seconds looking for that file. I'm going to run the exploit, and you're going to see it pop in. This is just to show you how dangerous this is. So I'm going to run sudo watch -n every 0.1 seconds, ls -lahr on temp pwnd. It's really hard for me to type on this keyboard because I have like a keyboard cover and it's to keep stuff from spilling on it, and it just makes it really difficult. But anyway, you can see now that we've got everything running and we are prepared to receive an attack. All right, so let's go ahead and pull it off. Let's also make sure that we have it. Let's make sure that we're actually detecting this in Elastic too. So in Elastic, I am going to go down to security rules. I'll go to detection rules in the SIM, search for cups. And you can see we've got this too, these two signatures here. So I'll select both of them and I will enable. And you can take a look, they're enabled now. You can take a look, if I look at one, you'll see the query that actually runs, where it's running an EQL query inside of the endpoint events that come from Elastic Defend. And it's basically searching for the parent process Fumatic-rip spawning a shell. And if that happens, we're going to get an event. Now, there's a little bit more logic to it, but that's the gist of it. So let's go back to our dashboard. Right now, we really shouldn't see anything bad. Yeah, there's nothing bad happening. These are just events, right? There's nothing evil happening on our little network here. So we're going to go back to our exploit and learn how to use it. You can see here, we just need a name, which would be the name of the printer that the victim will see. And of course, the attacker would craft this name to match nomenclature that looks expected in the target organization. The IP of the machine running the script, which will be us, the attacker. Port, just the port that our IPP server will be listening on. IPP, Internet Printing Protocol Server. We just need to make sure that port's there. And then base 64, we'll leave that the way it is. And you can see here, the attacker is using a PDF. He's creating a malicious PDF printer. And when the victim prints to that, instead of saving whatever they're printing as a PDF, it will actually write the result of the ID command to this file called pwn in the temp folder. So let's go ahead and see how this actually works. We're going to move into MITRE ATT&CK technique ID T1190 exploit forward-facing application, or public-facing application. You could say it either way. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Let's see, Python 3 cups hacks.py. All right, so we are ready to do this. So we're going to put in our IP. And I think we'll start by just writing a file to disk. All right, so we've got our IPP server started. It's base 64 encoding to look like this. And if we go back, let's see. All right, printer is there. You can see there's no file. But if I go to File, Print, Evil Printer shows up. I click Print. Actually, there's nothing to print. I just realized I didn't type anything out. But it still, it still worked. It sent the job to printer, and it shows that this file now exists, right? ls pwned. There it is. All right, so one other thing we could do is now elevate this to a reverse shell. So I'm going to go back to our Kali box, close this off. And I'm going to start a bin bash process. And inside of here, I'm going to have it connect back to me, the attacker, on port 443. Okay, that looks right. You got to be really careful with these reverse shell payloads because they are extremely case sensitive. Okay, I'm listening on 443. And now I can actually, let's see, I can close this window and close this one. We still have our PCAP running. Let's try to print. Actually, let me move this to the side a little bit so you can see the reverse shell pop in. All right, so we've got our evil printer selected. I click print. And we have a shell. Just like that, we've got a shell. Now, obviously that is not good. Let's go ahead and first complete this process. Now, this is typically what an attacker would do. After getting the shell, they're going to check to see if Python exists on the box. If Python does, which you can see Python 3 does, they can now use that to upgrade their shell. So I'm going to run Python 3 -c import pty. Python 3 -c. This is why they'll do it, because you notice, see all this gobbledygook I'm getting in my commands? I can't press backspace. Every time I press backspace, look what happens. It's kind of hard to operate out of that kind of environment from an attacker perspective. So I'm going to run Python 3 -c import pty pty.spawn. What am I spawning? Bin bash. Then I can press Control Z, stty raw -echo, bring it back to the foreground with 2 enters. And now if I export the current terminal, I can say clear. Now that works. I can backspace and I can actually look at who I am. I am this user IP. If I look at the box, you can see I'm actually on the victim machine, hostname, and I am essentially in charge of this machine as this particular user. So obviously this is a problem. Let's look at some of the things we can do from a defender perspective, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and first start up a SSH server on our Kali box because I want to copy the PCAP over. Let's see, status. So we've got SSH running. But before we even do that, let's go back to the victim and take a look at the system for a second. Right, so right now the attacker has a reverse shell in this box. And if I run something like sudo ps ef, I'll get a list of all the processes. Kind of hard to see. So what I like to do is I run it with the tac forest command, and I'll run it to less with the tac capital S, so I can move the keys right and left. So if it's trailing off the screen like here, I can just move it to the right and read. Now you can see I have the Elastic agent installed on its box. So obviously that's helping me with some things. But here you can actually see our reverse shell. So coming from cupsd, you trace the process ancestry down, and you can see we have our reverse shell. And you can see the evil printer is all up in here. Now another way that we could have found this a little quicker is instead of using tac forest, we could just grep and use a regular expression. Search for anything that might be a shell. And now we immediately find our bash reverse shell payload. We even see our base64 encoded payload. So that's pretty cool. You can also sometimes run pstree and try to find cups that way. Or if you're feeling bold, you can use glances. Which is kind of like top. It's a way that you can visualize the processes running on the system. You know, it's a little neater, a little cleaner. All right, so now we've got glances. And I can type glances. Actually, I'll run it with sudo. And you get a glance of everything happening on the system. The first thing I like to do is I press F and then enter so I can find things. So let's see if I can find anything related to bash. So I do see bash, but I don't actually see, I don't actually see what was entered. So this might not be the best approach. Let's see if I find, what is something else? Cups? Yeah, so glances is not really going to help us. But hey, if you didn't know about glances, now you do. It's a pretty cool tool that you can use. So Control C to exit that. We can also look at some of the logs. I'm surprised there's no log there. cdvar log cups. Oh, there's no error log. Okay. Well, if I run cat access log, so you can see the subscriptions. You can actually see evil printer in here. So if you know your access logs well, this could also be a great indicator to find, right? You see a create local printer. You might see a printer that's being created that you don't expect. Too bad it just shows localhost. It doesn't show the remote IP. That's kind of lame. But anyway, now what we can do is stop the PCAP. So I'll press Control C to stop that. And then we will SCP this over to Kali. So I'm going to run sudo SCP. And I'm just doing this so that we can analyze it. All right, we're going to SCP this to Kali 10.0.2.5, and we'll put it in our cups hacks directory. Great, we've got that transferred over. Let's just confirm. And it should be there in its entirety. Yep, it's a PCAP. And it's 97 megs. Now this is the cool thing about a tool I'm going to show you in a moment and why this is pretty awesome, but we'll get to that in a moment. But first thing I want to do is look at Elastic and just try to investigate some of the telemetry we've created there. So I'm refreshing the page. Notice it still doesn't say there's any results. You might say, well, we just ran the attack. What the heck is going on? Well, let's look at our policy. So if we go to Fleet, you can see we have a cup server policy that I created, and it has defend, which is Elastic Defend, which is basically the EDR. And it's set for malware protection to notify the user. But notice that neither memory threat or malicious behaviors are enabled. And also, down here for Linux, we're not collecting any session data, nor are we capturing the terminal output. So this is actually part of the problem. All right. So let's go ahead and set this to detect at least. And then we'll set malicious behavior protections to detect. Okay, that looks good. And we'll make sure that we are collecting the session data or save the integration. go back to the agent policies and agents 4 seconds ago. So we might need to give it a moment to actually check in. The agent, so there's an agent running on the cup server, the Elastic agent, and it's checking in with Elastic every few seconds or so. So we just need to make sure we actually check in so that we can get this new policy. All right, so it reset it. It went back to 8 seconds, so I know that it's checked in. Let's rerun our attack. And so we'll close this. Let's reset, clear, and let's go back to the victim. All right, back in Cali, we got our shell. Now, let's run a few more commands. Just, kind of what an attacker would do. And now let's go back to Elastic and see if we can detect this in the security dashboard. We'll click on Overview. We should see something in the alert trend. Now, it might just take a moment to actually show up. You can see we're set to today. We'll give it a moment for the logs to actually filter in. While we wait for that, let's go to Discover. And let's see if we can find anything here. So we'll set our agent to the OS box. This is our cup server. And we'll look at the message field. And this field is a column. Okay, we've got some interesting stuff there. So if I set message to Fumatic, do we get any results? We do. So we actually do see shell executions. And let's see, what other fields do we have? So it looks like our signatures did fire. We just have to wait for Elastic Security to detect it. There we go. All right, so let's zoom in on this. Just took a few seconds. So I'm just zooming in on what we have here. And we have all these different malicious events that were detected. So the best place to go really is the Alerts tab. And now it should show us everything. Yeah, we've got 10 alerts. All in OS box. They're all critical, as they should be. Linux reverse shell via child. So this is obviously bad. Let's go ahead and take a look at the timeline. And this shows you malware. We have an intrusion detection event with process bash on this source going to this destination, which is the attacker. By IP, that's the Internet Protocol process. So the CUPS server service is running as this particular user IP. And we have the reverse shell being returned to the attacker at 10.0.25. So what else can we do here? Well, we can go back. Oh, actually, I don't think that's the best way to go back. We can just click X. And if we look at the analyzer, we should be able to see the actual commands that we executed on the box. Yeah, so you can see here, cups D spawn fumatic rip. 2 milliseconds later, we got fumatic rip, terminates, shell comes out of that. This generated actually 4 alerts. So it's good to see that this was detected. And the reason it didn't block is because we're not set to prevent. And I'll show you in a moment what that looks like when it happens. But bash, you can see, is spawning. And then we have all these commands that we as the attackers ran. Who am I? Hostname. Command not found, right? Because I typoed something, right? LS and a few other things. So this is pretty cool. It's showing us the entire running process tree. Let's close the analyzer. Should be able to see the session view too. And this shows us the full process tree. So this is kind of like PS-EF, like what we saw in the cup server, but it's giving us more context. And you can see all the alerts that were generated for each of these various events. That echo command actually shows that's our base64 encoded payload. And here's the alerts that we can pivot to. So very, very cool. As you can see, if you're not using Elastic, you should think about it because it is definitely awesome. Now, the other thing I want to show you is this other tool called Zui. Yes, Zui. What the heck is that? Well, it used to be called Brim, but it's been rebranded. One of my old colleagues actually told me about Brim a few years ago. I don't want to mention his name because I don't think he likes the spotlight, but you know who you are. All right. And thank you, by the way, for showing me Brim. But it's really evolved a lot. And I want to show you kind of where it's come. So we now have this PCAP, and I want to show you Zui. So let's type brimdata.io. I believe that's the domain. And we'll go to download, and we'll just grab Zui for Linux, the Debian package for AMD 64. All right, great. Now we've got Zui. Let's open it up. But first, we need to install it. So it's in the downloads folder. We will install it with dpackage. All right, and now we can open up Zui. I'm going to go ahead and import data. We're going to grab that PCAP. Zui is really good with big PCAPs. That's one of the reasons why I like it so much. And it's going to process that PCAP. All right, so now we've got everything here. And let me kind of break down what this is. So this is Zui. It's the new name for Brim. And what it does is essentially takes in a PCAP, as you can see here, as input and adds it to a pool. And then it runs multiple analyzers on that PCAP. Zeek is one, Suricata is another, and then parses that data out in a way that makes it searchable and queryable. And the nice thing I like about Zui is that it does a really good job with large PCAPs. Wireshark coughs. Sometimes it just craps itself when it tries to take in a big file. Zui has no problem with that. And the nice thing is you can actually pivot to PCAP from Zui, and it'll just pull out the part that's filtered. And so you'll get exactly what you need when you need to dive into the bits. I'll show you what I mean in a moment. So let's go ahead and select this, and we're going to click Query the Pool. And you can see now we've got a history here. So I'm going to hide that right pane, and we have all of our Zeek flows. So you have to be somewhat familiar with Zeek in order to really make sense of this. If you're not, I think the site is zeek.org. Hopefully that's not a bad site. Okay. All right. So zeek.org. And if you go to is there like documentation? Yeah. Documentation. You can learn about the various Zeek logs. You can see there's all these logs. So there's a connection log, and Zeek basically creates a log whenever it inspects or finds something that matches one of its analyzers. So if it finds connection info, it'll create a connection.log. If it finds TLS traffic, SSL, it'll create a SSL.log. If there's no TLS traffic or SSL traffic inside the PCAP, there will be no SSL log. And there's a bunch of other things like PE log if it detects, executable files inside the traffic flow, or tunnel. There's a bunch of different logs that Zeek will capture and save for us. But what we want to do here is look at these logs. So we can see the log is indicated by the path parameter. So path con, that's a con log. Path SSL, that's the SSL log. So we have all this stuff inside of our capture PCAP. But how do we make sense of this? This is where we can start querying things. So let's name this looking for evil. And let's just start by getting a count of all of these path parameters. And the nice thing is you can actually see now, let's filter it as a table. See, can we do that? Yeah, if I open this right pane, show that right pane, and I go to columns, it would show, but I guess I can't actually do that. Okay, maybe this data doesn't actually have results that are available for that. We'll talk about correlations too. That's also really cool. So this isn't a good example to show off this right pane. I'll show that off in a moment. But the point that I want to show here is that this is all the data sources we have. We have con logs, we have capture, software, a bunch of different things. Let's start with software, right? Because maybe you want to see what software is in your environment. If we run a path search for software, it'll just search the software.log. And now we have some interesting results. You can actually see our IPP server. We can see cups, the user agent string. And now I believe if I open that right pane, you should see some interesting details here in the columns. Yeah, so what we get is we have 3 software entries. We see our host IP and actually the attacker machine, which is the server, the IPP server. And if we scroll over to the right, we can see the user agent strings. So that's kind of interesting, right? There may be some software in here that we weren't expecting. And so this is a good way to kind of begin your hunt. Let's check the con log for weirdness. This shows all of the Zeek connections. And if you want to get a good idea of sort of what these logs actually mean in a little easier way, I think if you type Corelight Zeek cheat sheet, yeah, I think this is what you want. Yeah, so this shows you the con log, shows all the IP, TCP, UDP, ICMP details. It shows you the con state, the history, DHCP log, all these different logs. It shows you all the goodness, all the things you need to know about them. Software log, right? A lot of really cool stuff. So definitely favorite this page if you don't have it. So here you can see we've got a lot of connection information. And if we show that right pane again, when you flip this flippy arrow, it actually adds those columns as nested inside the other columns. And so it just helps us to get more information here. Of course, we can hide all the columns, or we can show them all. And correlations will actually show you the flow. So you'll see the send, SYNAC, ACK, the data that was sent between the packets in this particular conversation. It shows you the duration, and it's all populated based on the community ID value, which is what you see in this column here, the UID. That's what threads all the different logs together: con, FTP, SSL, software. And then this history tab shows you all the things you've been doing, so you can just click back through and go back to a previous search. So there's our con log. Let's just cut out id.org_h. So ID, and then we say .org_h. That is the originating IP. And we also want the responding port and the responding host name. And that's kind of hard to see, so let's go back to our columns. Expand this out so now you can see everything. And what we want to do is sort and get a unique count and sort it reverse by count. Let's go ahead and make sure these columns are all good. So you can see most of these ports were 9200, but there are a few others, 443, and a few other ports in here, 5353, port 80, port 0, which I don't know what the heck that is. But let's look at 443. Maybe there's an IP in here that you would not expect to be over port 443. 2.4, and we look at, so if we just search 10.0.2.4 and 443, we get a bunch of hits over TLS and connection logs, but we get something weird. Do you see something weird here? It may not be obvious, but first of all, you see the alerts. Okay, I'm sure you noticed that, but check this out. Analyzer. What's that about? Well, it says that there was an analyzer for the protocol. And it noticed that 10.0.2.4, that's the cup server, connected to the attacker 10.0.2.5 over port 443. Okay, that might not be normal, or that might not be odd. I mean, assuming that IP comes back fine in virus total or passive total. Well, what's interesting is that the failure is for protocol violation. Invalid version in TLS connection. The version was 24947. What's it talking about? The reason that's showing up is because this isn't a valid SSL TLS handshake. The attacker, remember, when we ran our attack, we simply used that port, here's back to our reverse shell, on our box. But this isn't actually TLS. I'm abusing a well-known port for non-standard traffic flows. And that's why we're getting this alert, because Zeek realizes that this is not a protocol compliant conversation. It violates the rules of traffic that typically traverses port 443. And therefore, the protocol analyzer that runs SSL fails. There's a failure. So this is the first sign that there's something suspicious happening, like protocol tunneling happening. It takes kind of a keen eye to see that, but that is something that's definitely noteworthy here. We can also dig into this a little more if we look at this con log again. And we'll just cut out, actually, let's go back to the con log. And we'll cut out the response and the service, because I want to show you something. This is another sign of protocol tunneling. Okay, so we got a bunch of this. Let's go ahead and sort, get a unique count, and sort it by the count in reverse. Make sure all these columns are represented. Notice that you have 443, which is the service, SSL, that's the app layer service, layer 7, 6, and 5. But here we have this one flow. So most of them are normal, right? Six packets, 443 SSL. Check this out. You've got one 443 with no service, null, right? That is definitely a sign. That is a sign right there of protocol smuggling. And that is definitely something that should be inspected. So very good that you can see that. So let's go back to the previous search. Back here. Not there. Yeah, here. I think this is what we want. This is also the one that has these alerts. So I should be able to select, let's select the analyzer. And see this little fin? Download PCAPs. Check this out. This is sick. This is why I love Zooey. So now we've got all the PCAPs, but just for this flow. This isn't like the full PCAP. It's just the PCAPs for this flow. Because when I search now, when I right click, follow TCP stream, bam. Are you seeing this? These are the commands, right? Which Python? Remember I typed that? I typoed, and I tried to hit backspace, right? Here's me elevating my shell. Here's me exporting the terminal. You can see the client is sending what's in pink, and the server is responding in what is blue. And you can see the results of our commands. This is the hands-on keyboard interactions. And by the way, this is how you know that you have a live attacker in your environment, because of all these backspaces and typos. It's clear that this was not automated with a script, which can make it even potentially more dangerous. Because if it was just a script, maybe it's just a script kiddie running it. But there's an attacker with hands-on keyboard. Now you might need to step up your detection and response game. All right, so I think that is pretty cool. Actually, if we go back here, you can actually see oh, I think I killed that first shell, so we're not seeing it here, but you remember seeing it from the previous screen. Okay. All right, so let's close this out. You can see the PCAP is saved here. It's actually in your temp folder if you wanted to grab it later. But let's do some more investigation. Let's look at the DNS log. And we do a count. We want to do a count by the query. We want to see what's being queried and sort it, the top queries. And evil printer is showing up right here. Right? Maybe these other IPs are fine, http://bin.org. Maybe that's what you would expect. But evil printer, I don't know, right? This could be cause for concern. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool that Zooey shows that. Now, what about HTTP? Here's our HTTP logs, and we should be able to cut, let's see. See a bunch of GET requests. And we have the response MIME types. Okay. id.org h, id.resp. So we're looking at the originating host IP, the responding port, and responding host. We also want, let's also grab the method, the host, and the URI. Yeah, it looks good. Look at that. Evil printer hacks. Again, this is a great way of finding evil in your environment. Now, of course, it's not going to be this easy. We're in a controlled lab, but I did want to show you just the power of Zooey and the cool stuff you can do with it. Now, what about the Suricata event? So this is all Zeek. If you want to find Suricata, right? So Suricata IDS. Suricata is awesome. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with it. If you don't know it, you should definitely check it out. Look at the quick start guide and get up to speed on some of the things you can do. But for now, I just want to show you some of the alerts it found. It's based on the ET open rule set. If we search for event type equals alert, we get our Suricata alerts. And we have a ton. Oh, wow. We have a ton of alerts here. So actually, let's check this out, right? If I do a count by alert severity and alert category and sort by count. Look at that. Not suspicious traffic is the majority, but we have 9 miscellaneous activity alert types, which are severity 3. So that could be concerning. What exactly is this? Well, let's take off the alert. And let's go back to our view. Make sure everything is showing, all the columns. And what I'm interested in is this, the signature that fired. So for the miscellaneous activity, you can see, okay, external IP lookups, Linux APT outbound, that looks okay. Not suspicious. Oh, look at that. Okay, so everything's fine here. External IP address, lookup domain, ipfi.org. User agent, this is when we did our updates with apt. And then down here you see ET info, internet printing protocol, get printer attributes, outbound request. Right? Observe server responding with PDD file with known dangerous exploitable parameter. Right, this is really good stuff. And this is one of the reasons why I absolutely love Suricata. Let's see if we can take a look at this in a little more detail. Yeah, there is the rule. So if you want to dig in deeper, you could grab the ID of this event, which I'm not seeing for some reason. Signature ID, there it is. You could look up that signature ID. Oops. Signature ID right there. And then you could see exactly how this rule is being detected. All right, so what are some ways we can actually detect and prevent this attack? The first is to take your server, put it in a box, unplug it, and call it a day. Now, if that's not possible, you can either uninstall the CUP server, you can set up a firewall process to block incoming packets over port 631, UDP, and TCP, and you can use Elastic Defend. So let's try the Elastic Defend option here. So I've got a new shell listening here, and I'm going to go back and try to print to my evil printer. And immediately, did you guys see that? It failed. Why did it fail? Elastic Defend. Right? So what I did was I changed the protection level from detect to prevent for both memory threat and malicious behavior. So it's really important that you're aware of your security policy and how it's configured, because you might think, oh, we have Elastic Defend, we're defended. Yeah, but how is it configured? Because if it's not configured to respond in the way that's expected, you might be just as vulnerable as you would be if you didn't have Defend at all. And it can give you a false sense of security. So this is, I think, a really important point to keep in mind. Now, the other option, like I said before, is you could just, you could set up a firewall, right? So I could say sudo ufw enable to set up the uncomplicated firewall. And then I can say deny port 631, right? Now we've got that rule in place. Or I could just, actually, what was that? Control R, system, CT, yeah. I could just stop this particular service. And then check the status. Now it's stopped, right? So now I'm not exploitable anymore. I could remove it. Now it's actually uninstalled, right? These are all the things we can do to protect. Of course, I could, if I didn't remove it, I could upgrade to the latest patched version if I actually need to use CUPs. But really, you shouldn't have 631 exposed to the internet. Like, that port should not be exposed. But I could do a sudo apt upgrade CUPs with this, or I can do a sudo apt info on CUPs and just get more information about it before I upgrade, so I can see what version it's going to install. All right, so I think I've covered everything I wanted to in this video. Thank you for sticking to the end. Please make sure you like this video, subscribe, and forward it to a friend. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.